Vaya con Dios, amigo.
What's that mean?
Go with God.
You're listening to the Rock God Podcast. Welcome to another episode of the Rock God Podcast, the only podcast that talks to rock and heavy metal musicians about their thoughts or opinions about God. I'm your host, David Locklear, the owner and head writer at heavy-vinyl.com. Today we're going to be talking to George Perdikis. Now, George is one of the founding members of arguably the largest Christian rock band in the world, the Newsboys. George started the Newsboys with his friend Peter Furler in the early 80s in Australia. Shortly after their first album was released, George left the band, and in the subsequent years, he went from being a Christian to an atheist. George took a few minutes out of his busy schedule to sit down and talk to us about his spiritual journey and what it's like to be the founder of one of the biggest rock bands in the world. So how are you doing?
I'm very well, thank you.
Good. I appreciate you talking to me for a few minutes. I won't hold you up for too terribly long.
No, look, you can have as much time as you need. Is this like are you going to record this interview, or what's the what's going on with this interview?
Yeah, I'm going to record it. I have a website called heavy-vinyl.com. And what I do, it's like at that website, I generally do coverage of rock and heavy metal bands and things of that nature, because I've written for newspapers, local, and I've written for a bunch of online magazines and whatnot. So this is my own personal site, and I decided to do a podcast because I don't know, it just seems sort of like a logical extension from going out and interviewing bands and getting their story and whatnot. It just seems sort of like the appropriate time to try to start up something where I kind of pre-record it and actually put it out as a show that people can listen to. Yeah,
that sounds good. Is it secular music or Christian music or both, or...?
Yeah, it's actually both. Like, I'm a Christian. I grew up in a fundamentalist, sort of a church background, but I've always been interested in other people's belief systems and, you know, why they believe what they do. And that was sort of the genesis of this, so to speak, for this podcast, because I always found people's, I guess, their lyrics and their motivations and whatnot, when it's religious or non-religious or even anti-religious. I always found that kind of fascinating, and I always wanted to know the story behind it. So I figured that would be the angle for the podcast, is just talk to people who either do or don't believe in God, and you know, the reasons for their choices.
I think that's a good discussion to have, because I can relate to what you're saying there. You know, as someone that was once a Christian, I actually battled with listening to secular music due to the influence from elders in the church and so forth. So we couldn't really talk about it back then, because those sorts of things were really hard to talk about to people in fear of being judged. so I could totally relate.
Oh yeah, that was a big part of how I was raised. Was the church I was in? They would I would enjoy listening to rock music when I was growing up. It was like Cinderella and Ozzy, things like that. And I was always given the pat answer of, well, there's this part in the Bible that says the righteous shouldn't be yoked with the unrighteous, and so listening to rock music means you're going to hell.
Right.
So that never set well with me.
Yeah, that sounds familiar.
Well, yeah. So, because when I found out that you had become an atheist after being one of the founders of the Newsboys, that just absolutely fascinated me. I learned about it probably about a year or so ago, and it had always kind of stewed in the back of my mind. And then when I came up with the idea for this podcast, you were one of the first ones that I was determined to talk to if I could possibly get a hold of you. I felt like it was going to be a long shot, so I'm really happy that we're actually going to be able to talk about this, because I have so many questions. So, tell me, when you were growing up, what was your church background? What was it like where you were to be raised? Were you raised in like a fundamentalist type of environment?
Well, it's an interesting story. My dad is Greek, but he was born and raised in Egypt, in Alexandria, and he migrated out with my grandparents in the 40s. He was born in 1940, and he came out to Australia in 1948. So my Greek relatives made a trip over to Australia and brought their Greek Orthodox religion with them. So he had that background, but he came to Australia, and when Australia was just sort of the population when my dad came out, it was probably only about 5 or 6 million people here in Australia. So Australia was still sort of growing. And he ended up meeting my mother, who was born here in Australia, and she kind of just had a Christian, like a Church of England kind of background. But they met when they were very young and spawned us kids. I have a brother and a sister. And they met when they were like teenagers and got married quite young. And they went through a period through their early marriage of changing religions, because Billy Graham came over to Australia and went around to all the big showgrounds around Australia and preached the Word of God. So my parents sort of decided to become born again and went through that experience. It didn't really last long. My mum, she was, tried to remain being a believer. But my dad initially was a believer, but then he didn't really practice it, though. He sort of gave it away at the end. But we were kind of brought up in an evangelical environment briefly.
How long would you say briefly? You said it was like almost a year?
Oh, no. We went to, as far back as I know, I went to Sunday school. We went to church. But as we got older, I noticed that we sort of didn't go as much to Sunday school and at church. It sort of just started to fade away until I was about 15, when I went to a Christian school, actually. I was actually kicked out of school, and my parents thought, to fix him up, we'll send him to a Christian school. That'll fix him up. So I went there briefly to this Christian school called Bethesda Christian School here in Adelaide, and which is where I met Peter Furler. We're talking 1981 here. And I was there for 6 months, and I decided to leave that school because I couldn't handle the change. I went from a public school to this evangelical Christian school, and all of a sudden we were sitting in cubicles with this whole American Christian education system. And I was there for 6 months, and I decided to leave there. But while I was there, I met Peter Furler, who was the drummer. And I started playing guitar at the age of 13, and I was keen on putting a band together. And I went to this Christian school, and Peter was one of the 2 drummers that was there. It was a small school. There was only about a couple of hundred people there, and Peter was a drummer, and there was this other guy. And I met Peter, and I decided to jam with him. It was either him or this other guy. I decided to jam with Peter because he said he had a bigger drum kit, so that impressed me. And we're talking about the time, back then I was listening to bands like Black Sabbath and Iron Maiden and Judas Priest, and he said he had a big drum kit, so I was like, yes, this is what I want, a drummer with a big kit. So we formed a friendship, and then the rest is history.
Right. Yeah. I mean, it's kind of funny that you say that you went from a public school to a Christian school and then got kicked out. I kind of had the exact opposite experience. I went to a Christian school, got kicked out, went to public school. So it's kind of funny.
Well, I kind of was kicked out of the Christian school because my behaviour didn't quite adapt to their strict, regimented kind of system. So I just naturally rebelled. Plus, they told me that my record collection was of the devil. And, of course, I went home and smashed all my albums that I had saved for a long time, saving up for buying all these albums. I had Black Sabbath, I had Rush, Thin Lizzy, Iron Maiden, Judas Priest, AC/DC. The list goes on. Probably a lot of records you had.
Yeah.
And I went and smashed them. Only to feel bad about it a few months later, I ended up starting to buy them all back again. So I had this sort of battle between my love for music, for secular music, and this kind of, with the Bible and what God says, and they said that I should be listening to bands, Christian bands. I gave it a go. I tried listening to bands like the Resurrection Band and Striper at the time.
Right.
I tried to like it, and I tried to convince myself that I liked it, but it just didn't have something about the bands that I really liked, the secular bands. There was something I just couldn't let go of these bands. There was something, I don't know, there was a connection that I had to have with this secular music. So for the first part of my Christian experience was this battle between what music I should be listening to. I just basically gave all my power away, which looking at it as an adult, I just maybe regret.
And, well, with me, I had the same experience where I tried very hard to like a bunch of the bands, but they were just, I guess the vibe of so many of them were so kind of cheesy and earnest, and I needed something with a little more edge, and I ended up finding bands like Deliverance. They were like this speed metal Christian band that sounded pretty genuine. They sounded pretty angry. That sort of music always kept my attention, and so anytime I found a Christian band that seemed to really put forth a really solid kind of secular sound almost, I latched onto those and never let go. So I feel your pain in that experience.
I was in the Christian music industry, obviously, but back then, I have to admit, it was more about the music for me. I wasn't actually listening to the lyrics, so the music was more important to me. Being a young guitarist who loved heavy metal, I just wanted to emulate my favourite guitar players at the time. It wasn't until as I got older, I realised how important that the lyrics actually were, and now lyrics are really important to me now, obviously, and telling stories. I think with my secular music, I found that it was real. What these musicians were expressing were real. It's like these authentic, real bands like Black Sabbath. These guys were real, and their message was real, and that's why it connected to a lot of people. These guys weren't worshipping the devil. They weren't smart. Black Sabbath weren't smart enough to worship the devil. They were just plain expressing their life growing up in England and the hardships that they experienced from poverty and expressing it through instruments. And that's why their music has stood the test of time, and a lot of bands, in that same boat have stood the test of time because their music was real and pure. And I look back now at, with my church youth group leader told me that, these bands were doing the work of the devil. I look back now and can only laugh.
Right, yeah. Well, you know, with you being you being so entrenched, being a fan of secular music, what led you to end up, creating what is arguably one of the bigger Christian pop rock bands on the planet?
Peter and I, when we met in 1981, I would go to his house every second weekend. He would come to my house every second weekend. He lived here in Adelaide at the time. And even when I left the Christian school, we still remained friends, and we would travel to each other's house. He lived about 15 miles up the road, and I would catch a train to his house with my amp and guitar and a bag full of leads, and I'd catch a train. That's dedication, catch the train to his place, and then eventually we got our driver's license so we could drive to each other's house. And we would jam every second weekend for a couple of years. And we were just playing covers. We were just playing anything. I still have tapes of us jamming, actually, when we were 15. He eventually moved to Queensland with his parents. They moved up to Queensland, and so we sort of stopped, obviously jamming. And about a year later, I joined the Air Force, and I was actually posted up to Amberley Air Force Base, which was up in Queensland near Brisbane. And it was a 2-hour drive from Peter's house. So on weekends, I used to go to his place and stay there for the weekend, and we started jamming again. And it was just him and I, and then I would do that. We would continue our jamming. Eventually, I was there, and I was invited to another jam, and I met a guy named Sean Taylor, who was a bass player. And I said, listen, do you want to come and jam with a friend of mine, Peter Furler? We're sort of putting a band together. And he liked bands that I liked. He liked Rush. So it was like, yeah, we have a connection already. So Sean came along, and we started jamming as a three-piece. And then we were all going to a church up there on weekends. And that's where we eventually met John. He was just a local guy up there. And, he sang a little bit in the choir. And he became a friend of ours. And we just, he kind of just fell into the band. He kind of sang, and we thought, why don't you come in? And we were sort of playing a few covers, and then we started to write a few, originals, and then it just sort of evolved from there. Then it got, it was getting more serious and more serious, and then I ended up leaving the Air Force to pursue this band. As far as when it became a Christian band, we were sort of born-again Christians at that stage, and we thought, are we going to be a Christian band or a secular band? We thought we would be a Christian band because we thought it was the right thing to do. We thought the message, we thought we wanted to be positive, and at the time it was the only way we knew how to be positive in music was to go down the Christian route. And it was really a decision like that. I actually remember talking with Peter saying, do you want to be a Christian band or a secular band? And we kind of felt that we don't want to do the devil's work. We don't want to,
Right.
So, that's as simple as that. That's how we actually became a Christian band. It's so pathetic.
So it wasn't necessarily out of conviction, but it was more like, what would be the best option, almost? It's like, this is the way to do good.
Well, we thought we would, we had it in our minds from the church elders that the secular music was of the devil, and we wanted to play rock and roll, and Peter's parents were pretty full-on evangelical Christians, so we just decided to go that route. We took that road. We could have gone the other way, but we went that way.
Yeah.
And yeah, it was really quite, I just remember that vividly, and that was like 30 years ago, actually longer, 85, when we made that decision. We weren't ordained by God. We didn't feel any message. We weren't slain with the Spirit saying, this is your calling. It was pure and simple. Let's just go this route because we think that's the best way to go and put a bit of positivity into the on Earth.
Well, what's funny is that Black Sabbath also have a bunch of songs where they were talking about how they were just hippies and they wanted to spread positive music or positive messages, but the music was really dark. So it almost sounds like you're not that far removed from the Newsboys formation, from Black Sabbath's formation in terms of motivation.
Right. Yeah. They just decided to go down that dark route because, discovering the, watching that Black Sabbath movie, that's where they got the name. I forgot who directed that old movie, but they just decided, wouldn't it be fun to play, scary music? And so they started to write scary music, which was different to what was out at the time. And as musicians, we're always trying to discover something different and original. They did, because it was like a part of the evolution of music. Everyone's trying to write something different. It's bound to pop up somewhere in the evolution of music.
Yeah, I mean, it's just kind of a natural progression, because there's always going to be some sort of darkness that people possess. It's imbued, I think, in everybody's genetics to some degree. And I feel like the 70s was almost like a dark backlash against the 60s, and that's sort of where Black Sabbath came from on some level.
Right. Well, they didn't want to be drafted, and they didn't want to have to go to fight war for the for the politicians, sending out all these poor people to do the dirty work. So they were angry. They had every right to be angry, and they were young at the time. And that's what youth do. They go through that rebellious, fuck you. We want to, we're going to do it our way. We're not going to listen to you people because you're full of shit.
Right. And that's always refreshing, especially when you kind of get inundated with the sort of same old. When somebody comes along and does something a little bit different that just kind of feels like a nice breeze, even if it's a dark breeze, it's nice to have.
Well, music, there's so much, I like all kinds of music. Depends what mood I'm in. Sometimes I want just mellow music where I can just chill out and relax. And sometimes I want to listen to full-on, heavy kind of rock, because that's the mood I'm in. And then other times I'll listen to classical music, or I might listen to jazz music, or I might listen to, there's Muslim music that I think is absolutely brilliant. I don't know what they're singing about, but melodically and musically it's like, wow, this stuff is great. And I love Greek music. That was my first exposure to music, actually, was Greek music. That was all that was around when I was young. All I heard was bouzouki, the bouzouki. And that was my first influence. I wanted to be a guitarist that sounded like a bouzouki. So I like all kinds of music, as long as it's real and pure and the message is believable and relatable.
And did you feel like the music of the Newsboys was not, it did not feel that way? And is that part of why is that one of the reasons you left the band?
I actually started that band officially in 85, and I was in that band for 5 years. We got signed in 1987, and we went over to America, and we already had 40 songs under our belt, so we just picked 10, or I think 8 maybe, I can't remember how many's on the first album. The first album I'm talking about is Read All About It. We did that one, we did that album, and then we went back to America the next year, and we did the next album. I can't remember what it was. Hell is for Wimps, I believe. I actually wrote it, but I didn't play on that album. I'd left the band. So, but I wrote most of the music to that album.
You're talking about Hell is for Wimps?
Hell is for, yeah, that's the album.
Okay.
So I wrote probably 90% of the music, but I've left the band, and I wasn't credited at all for it. But those two albums and the music that we had already written, I love the music, but there was something about the lyrics. I believed in God at the time, and I wanted to do God's work. But there was still something about lyrically. I was a little bit embarrassed to tell my friends. They'd say, "Oh, what do you do?" I'd say, "Oh, I'm in a band." But then I'd say, "Oh, yeah, I'm in a Christian band," and all of a sudden it just took the shine off. Because even though I believed in God, there was something about it that to me wasn't quite right, and I didn't know what it was, but I still did it anyway, because I felt that it was God's work, and we were called to do this.
Like sort of a nagging doubt was sort of always there. Is that kind of what you mean?
A gut feeling, an instinct, that gut feeling that we all try to avoid sometimes. A lot of times we don't trust our gut feelings, but there was something in my gut, and I didn't know what it was, but there was something about it that wasn't quite measuring up to my other bands that I liked, and it was to do with the lyrics, because all the songs were about the same subject. And that's another thing that that's one thing I don't like about Christian music, is every song is about the one subject.
Right.
It's like, can't you sing about anything else? Aren't you happy about the sun shining? Or can't you sing about the beach or something? Why does it always have to be about one topic? It's kind of like, if all secular music sang about one topic, I'd hate secular music.
Right.
I'd get bored shitless listening to it. Or if every song had the lyrics to Sweet Home Alabama, it would be like living in hell.
Right. And I remember not a few years ago there was a prominent Christian band. I don't know if I should name them, but I remember they actually got into something of a war. War is kind of a strong word. A headbutting contest might be better, but they wanted to sing songs that were related to love for their wife, or going for a walk in the woods and whatnot. And apparently the Christian label, pushed back and said, something to the effect that you can't go outside of these specific parameters. And apparently that caused a really big rift. And it sounds exactly like what you're saying, is that it's the same subject over and over again, and there's no variation.
I get it. You're locked in to those parameters. That's not music. That's not expression. Music's about expressing all forms of life. There's so much variety and colour and experience on this planet alone, let alone the rest of the universe. There's so much beauty, and there's so much to talk about and sing about. We have got an endless smorgasbord of music out there for people to enjoy. You may not like it all, but there's going to be a lot that you do like, and that's fantastic, and that's what makes life interesting. I love all bands. I don't just love Black Sabbath, Iron Maiden, Rush, Judas Priest, Triumph, The Police, Thin Lizzy. I don't just like those bands. I like all forms of music. It's just amazing, the different varieties of music.
Oh, yeah. I know. I'm the same way. When I was growing up, it was, for the longest time, it was only heavy metal. But then as I got older, I began to appreciate, jazz. Miles Davis is actually pretty interesting. And then I kind of moved over to Hank Williams Sr., and wow, he's got some dark lyrics. So when you close yourself off, I feel, to a more comprehensive life experience, you're really sort of cheating yourself. And I think that's sort of what you're saying. Right,
exactly. Living in a bubble, as a musician particularly, because I get bored really quickly, and as a serious musician who wants to try and be the best musician, I like to listen to everything and be influenced by flamenco music, classical music, jazz music. There's even country music that I like. I mean, I love Johnny Cash. I love everything from Motorhead to Johnny Cash to Al Di Meola to all kinds of music. It's so good. And to limit yourself with just singing about one subject, oh my God, it'd be like living if the world was painted blue and that's all you saw was blue. You'd soon get sick of blue. You want red and yellow and green and all these other colours. It's like, whoa, that all of a sudden becomes three-dimensional. Mm. And that's what music is. So, yeah.
Do you think that maybe it's that hunger that you've always had for more of a diverse experience, or a diverse human experience, is maybe what led you to become more of an atheist?
I left the Newsboys in 1990. And I got married at a very young age, totally ignorant of the realities of life, but I soon started to learn about life. A couple of years into my marriage, I got married in 1990. I left the Newsboys in 1990. Got married and I got a job teaching guitar in a music school, and I started doing gigs in pubs and clubs. And I started to learn about life playing in pubs and clubs. I started to meet lots of people with different experiences, and I just started playing to real regular people. And I've done more than 2,500 gigs in pubs and clubs. So you get to meet people, and then you get to see their life as they grow older and go through different relationships and and so forth. So I started to just examine people's behaviour and learn a lot from the stage of playing pubs and clubs. Also in 1992, I watched a documentary on TV, and it was about the Apollo space mission. I loved it. I was like, wow, this is fascinating. So it ignited a passion for watching more documentaries like that. I started to go to second-hand stores and buy second-hand videos at the time and second-hand books on space. And I just started to learn more about it. And the years went on. I started taping all the documentaries that came on TV with all the space shows that would come on. Even if it was at 3 a.m, I'd get up and tape something for 15 minutes and then go back to sleep once it finished. So I'd have a catalogue of it on video. And I did that for years and years and years. I just started to realise everything that I was taught from church doesn't add up to what I'm learning here. And then, of course, YouTube came along, and I could watch more documentaries online and so forth. So I guess I've had a passion for space since 92, so what's that, 27 years? I officially changed my belief. It didn't happen overnight. It was over quite a long period. I think I officially sort of decided that, you know what, I don't actually subscribe to the Bible anymore. I feel more alive by learning about science and all these space documentaries and that. I found it more fascinating. It was like, holy shit, the universe is just bloody huge. It's bigger than I could ever imagine. And that's how it kind of just started. I wasn't bitter. It was like, fuck the church. It wasn't anything like that. It was just a natural kind of progression.
Yeah, just over the course of years and years.
Yeah, people think, oh, he's bitter. It's like, I'm not fucking. I'll tell you what I'm bitter about. Fucking you guys telling me that I'm bitter. That's like, shut up. Who the hell are you? I mean, so I make fun of it now because it's therapy for me.
Right. It's kind of ironic because it seems like there's a lot of people who actually attribute learning more about the universe, giving them a deeper faith in God. So I find that fascinating.
Right. I totally get that as well. I should elaborate a bit more. It was just a combination of what I was learning through, the documentaries I was watching, years of that. It was a combination of that and also observing the behaviour of Christians and secular, people that aren't religious. And not just Christians, but other religions as well, I might add. It was observing the behaviour. It was examining their lifestyles and where they came from and the way their parents are. And I got interested in psychology as well, so I started to read books on psychology and just learn a bit about really my own upbringing to understand what I had been through and because when I grew up, I thought my family was normal. And then as I grew up, I realised it was anything but normal. And then I thought, alone, thinking, am I the only person growing up in this environment? And as I grew up, I realised, you know what? most people are dysfunctional. So I wanted to go on a bit of I wanted to learn a bit more about human behaviour and why people are like they are. And so it was a combination of everything. But look, I can't prove that there is no God. If there was a God, if Jesus was here right now, of course I would believe in him. Mm-hmm. I'll be the first to admit if there was more evidence of a God in a tangible way, in a real way that's obvious, I go, sure, I believe in God. But I don't know the answers to the universe. That's one thing I have learned through learning about cosmology. One thing I do know is I don't have the answers. Neither do all the scientists on the planet. They don't have the answers as well. I don't believe in science. I believe in the scientific method, because that method is just an honest way of trying to find and figure things out without people arguing and bickering over what's right and wrong. It's a method that I subscribe to, not just scientifically, but I like that method in music as well, because I apply that rationale, that way of trying to solve and work things out. I apply that to my band, the bands that I'm in, because it's the best way to get the best result. And I just like that. I find that it's a humble way, and people can express their opinions without being shouted down at. Whether they're right or wrong, they still want to express themselves. My current understanding of the universe has led me to this. But I'm open to change. I'm always open to change. The more we learn about the universe, I can't wait to find out what the next secret of the universe is. It's like, it's exciting. It's like, holy shit. Yeah, it's so amazing. We're just such a primitive organism on this speck of dust floating through the ocean of space. And yet we have come to a point where we can actually ask these questions. We may not have the answer, but we're still at that point in our evolution where we can ask big questions.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Which is great.
And I think that the more that people ask questions, from my perspective, it gets people closer to the concept of God. That's how I feel about it. And regardless if people believe that or not, I guess the way that the universe is, that there are so many things at a microscopic level and a macroscopic level that cannot be explained. And to me, in my mind, there's got to be somebody or something tending to it. But again, I'm like you, I can't prove it, you know?
That's what you just said then is what we would call the God of the gaps. And that's the problem with people that believe and people that don't believe. Just because you don't have the answer for it, it doesn't mean to us God made it. It just means that we haven't gone to the next level and figured that out. But I do totally get what you said then, because I've heard a lot of people say that they have this awe. It gets to a certain level where it's just got to be God. It can't be anything else. I totally get that, because I felt like that as well, and I know people that still feel that way. That's not an answer for me. Mm-hmm. But I still get that feeling. I do get it.
Right. And I'm the same way, that if somebody says, that doesn't prove anything to me, because I'd say a great deal of my friends are actually agnostic at the very least. And I'm like, that's fine. You know, and I think that that's sort of what's lacking in a lot of spiritual relationships between people, is that there's not a kind of a mutual, hey, you do your thing, I do mine, and we can still enjoy the same music.
Yeah, people like to talk about it, though, because that's what we do as humans. We try and figure the answers out to everything. And it is a subject that I do like talking about, because it's been a big part of my life. Mm-hmm. But I like talking about it like we're talking about it, just kind of like normal people having a normal conversations. But I definitely don't have the answers to the universe.
Well, that's a shame because I really needed some, man. I'm just kidding.
I know I'm part of it, and
Right.
that makes me feel that makes me feel good, knowing that I'm part of it, knowing that all the elements that make up our body and come from the foods that we have eaten throughout our lifetime, and those foods come from the earth, and all the elements that made up the earth. I believe in that. I can see how that poetic description of how we came from stars is actually quite spiritual, if you will. I don't like to use that word spiritual because it gives this illusion that you're superior to everyone, and I'm not superior to anyone. But I do feel a sense of, I will call that word spiritual, just to feel connected with the universe. I think ultimately people want to feel connected with the universe, and that's why a lot of people turn to whatever religion. Bottom line is, it makes them feel a connection with the universe. Otherwise, it'd be pretty lonely. Mm-hmm. So if that makes them feel connected, that's a good thing, I guess. Well, it is a good thing if you feel connected. It's not that I have a problem with the connection. It's the rest of that comes with it. It's the oppression of women, this and that, all these things that we're bickering about here on planet Earth. That's what I don't like about it. Mm-hmm. If everyone could just, chill out, relax, get to the point in their evolution where, hey, listen, we're all brothers and sisters ultimately. We're all connected. And if you can't see that, a problem to the planet Earth, because you're going to end up taking from the Earth instead of contributing to the Earth in a positive way. But once you feel a good connection with the Earth and you realise that we're all brothers and sisters and other people have feelings as well, if you can evolve in your empathy and your compassion, well, that's what we need to do. Life's hard enough. Life is hard, and it's hard enough to get through life as it is. We need all the help we can get. So I'm a big believer on, you know what, we need to fucking pull together and get through life as best as we can.
Absolutely. When you participate in trying to keep others from being happy, that just seems like a real stupid exercise in futility, regardless of what your motivation is.
That's very true. Obviously they're not happy within themselves. But isn't that the ultimate goal, is to find some sort of peace and happiness? Mm-hmm. It's in the best interest for everyone, because if you're happy, it's going to make other people happy. Because there's nothing worse than hanging out with someone that's miserable because they just want to be miserable for the sake of it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's like hanging out with a mean drunk. You're like, this is not fun. There's a time and place.
If you're down and out and there's a crisis in your life, I'm going to be the first one there to help. But when you're going around playing the victim card your whole life to get attention, that's what's going to zap the energy of people. Mm-hmm. And because they haven't got time, they don't want to spend their whole life listening to you moan and groan about bullshit, insignificant problems. If there's a real problem, we'll be there to help. Otherwise, get happy, because it makes our life much more pleasant. Right. Makes the planet much more pleasant. And it can be as simple as just smiling more. When you change lanes on the highway, use your bloody indicator so the person behind you know that you're turning. And I know what it's like in America, crossing from one lane to the seventh lane with people not indicating. It's like, fuck me, man. But, just bloody put your blinkers on. That will make our life so much more pleasant.
I know, and it's like when you think about it in terms of just a physical motion, it's about an inch of movement that causes the rest of everyone else to be okay.
So these people's attitude is like dropping a rock in a pond. They don't realise the effect, the consequence it has on other people. So as I get older, I don't take myself serious anymore. I don't identify with what I own or what I don't own. I just want to be as happy as I can to make my life more pleasant and other people's life more pleasant.
Mm-hmm. Well, George, I have to be a nerd. I'm going to go ahead and say it's been an honor talking to you. I hope I didn't sound too ridiculous with my questions. I was trying to keep the nerd at bay while I was talking to you.
Mate, you just sounded like one of my mates that live here in Adelaide, so I'm happy to talk to you today or any other day. Feel free to call me anytime.
So that's going to do it for another episode of the Rock God Podcast. I want to thank George for taking a few minutes to be on our show. Go check out his band, My Heathen Frequency, at their Facebook page. Also, go onto our Instagram page, Heavy Vinyl Records, our Facebook page, Heavy Vinyl and Cassettes, and we're also on Twitter, @VinylHeavy. And on top of everything else, you can go to heavy-vinyl.com to check out any records or cassettes that you think you might need, or for any news that you might want to find out about the heavy metal and rock scene. I'm your host, David Locklear. Thanks so much for listening. God bless.